I'm Emily Chang in San Francisco, and this is Bloomberg Technology. Coming up in the next hour, in the 24 hours since pro-Trump supporters stormed the U.S. Capitol, he's been suspended from Facebook, Twitter, and multiple other platforms, cutting the president off from his base. Is it enough? We will speak to Ellen Powell, the former CEO of Reddit. Plus, investors hot on the cold. A rally in Snowflake defies the end of a lockup, freeing millions of shares. We will speak to the CEO. And Takeover Thursday, online lender SoFi plans for more deals after going public via SPAC. We're going to speak with its CEO, who says the company will invest heavily in acquisitions. All of those stories in a moment, but first, U.S. stocks roared on stimulus bets as the Nasdaq jumped 2.5%. I want to get straight to Ed Ledlow, who's been following the day's market action. Ed, lots of big tech movers on the day.
Yeah, we're in full risk-on mode this Thursday, Emily. As you said, Nasdaq's 100 up around 2.5%. Really, tech stocks being one of the big driver in U.S. equity markets. But you're also seeing the New York FANG index, that gauge of big cap tech stocks, social media, Tesla, and the like, up 2.5%. But all but two members gaining on the day. And the Philadelphia Semiconductor Index, or SOX, up almost 4%, continuing the outperformance that we saw in 2020, carrying it over into the new year. I want to touch on Bitcoin briefly. It did top $40,000 for the first time at one point during Thursday's trading session. It teetered around 39,000 for the majority of Thursday and hasn't quite got back to that 40,000 level. But it's not clear whether you'd call this a risk-on trade or a haven asset at this point, given the crazy excitement and gains that we've seen in Bitcoin of recent weeks. And I want to go back to chip stocks briefly because Micron out with earnings after the bell. Shares rising after hours after the company reported a pretty bullish second quarter sales forecast. This is the largest U.S. maker of memory chips. As you'll know, it's had some upgrades on the stock recently. Lots of optimism about demand for memory chips in smartphones and computers. And it says it's going to have a decent second quarter sales, around $5.6 billion. One specific laggard to focus on in equity markets today, Twitter, down 1.7% after, of course, it took actions against President Trump, suspending temporarily his Twitter account and then threatening to make that suspension permanent if the president continues to breach Twitter's rules as it states them. But other social media stocks, for example, Facebook and Snap, in positive territory despite following suit and also taking action against President Trump's accounts, just like Twitter did. Emily.
All right, Bloomberg's Ed Ledlow. Ed, thanks so much for that roundup. Now, the list of platforms that have decided to remove or suspend President Trump keeps getting longer in the wake of Wednesday's violent protests at the U.S. Capitol. That list includes Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, Snapchat, Shopify, and Amazon streaming service Twitch. For more, I want to bring in Bloomberg's Kurt Wagner, who covers social media for us. And Kurt, Facebook, in perhaps the most unprecedented move, has suspended the president indefinitely and at least for the next 2 weeks through Inauguration Day. Talk to us about how surprising this is, given for the last 4 years, nothing like this has happened.
Well, you said it, Emily. It's unprecedented. This is not something that we have seen. In fact, Facebook has been criticized, as you know, for really doing the opposite. People think that they've been too soft on the president, that CEO Mark Zuckerberg has failed to enforce the company's policies against him. So the fact that we're now seeing a full-on suspension, not just for 24 hours as they initially announced yesterday, but now all the way through the end of his presidency to the inauguration, is a really, really big deal. Of course, there are still people who are saying this is too little too late. I think there's some probably validity to that. But at the same time, this is by far the most severe Facebook has been against the president.
Absolutely. And here from Mark Zuckerberg's post earlier today, he said, "We believe the risks of allowing the president to continue to use our service during this period are simply too great. Therefore, we are extending the block we've placed on his Facebook and Instagram accounts indefinitely and for at least the next 2 weeks until the peaceful transition of power is complete. Now, I want to contrast this with Twitter, which did suspend the president for 12 hours after he deleted some of the offending tweets that violated their terms of service. You have reported that Twitter has told you he's deleted those tweets already, so his account should actually be back up and running, but it appears he hasn't tweeted yet. Is that correct?
That's right. I was told last night about 10 o'clock p.m. Pacific time that the president had indeed deleted the tweets that Twitter was demanding of him, and that meant that the 12-hour suspension clock was basically running. So that would be that, at the very latest, 10 a.m. this morning Pacific time, he should have had his account back. Now, obviously, to your point, he has not tweeted, which is very unlike the president. It's also possible, though, that because Twitter said, if you violate our rules again, we're not just going to suspend you, we're going to actually ban you from the service, that perhaps everyone's just kind of taking a little break to gather themselves here. But yes, as far as I know, the suspension should be lifted, but we have yet to hear from the president.
Now, the president was sending messages out through his aides because he didn't have access to Facebook or Twitter earlier. What are the other rising social media sites? Where would or could the president go if he gets deplatformed by these major companies? Is it Parler? Is it Gab?
If I had to guess, I would say it's Parler, mostly because there's already a number of conservative and Republican politicians that have accounts on Parler. I believe the president's son, Don Jr., has an account on Parler. And so it was, if you remember, about 6 months ago over the summer before the election, it was kind of one of those hot apps that a lot of people were talking about in conservative circles. And so if I had to guess, he would go there. But, I wrote at the time that the president loves an audience, right? He loves to have a big crowd. He likes to be able to talk to people. And Facebook and Twitter are the places he can reach the most people. So I don't think he's eager to leave these platforms, but of course it might not be his choice. And if that's the case, my money would be on Parler, but there are a number of different services he could end up on.
Right. The Parler CEO spoke with us a few weeks ago, said Trump wasn't on there yet, but that he thought it was inevitable. So that is something we're watching. Bloomberg's Kurt Wagner, thank you so much for that update. Sticking with this story, the crackdown from social media companies on the president's accounts. We're joined by Ellen Pao, the CEO of Project Include, an advocacy group that promotes workplace diversity. She's called on social media platforms to take greater action against the president and was also the former CEO of Reddit. Ellen, thank you so much for joining us today. So you've been calling for this for 4 years. I assume you think this is too little too late. There are folks out there who think that Mark Zuckerberg and Jack Dorsey have blood on their hands. What is your take?
Yeah, I would be in that group. I think it's been clear that the problems have been escalating, that they've been growing. It started with some people talking about white supremacy. It moved into action with Charlottesville, where people were actually trying to harm people. And now we've gone all the way to an insurrection, a coup. And I think a big part of it was predictable, from allowing the president to tweet and to encourage people, to incite people, the harassment that the Twitter was used for against individuals, against reporters, against other politicians. It all was a kind of, it was a path towards where we are today, and it wasn't a surprise.
Now, you retweeted a tweet a couple of hours ago calling for Mark Zuckerberg to suspend his account and resign. You said the Facebook board should do the same. So to be clear, do you think Mark Zuckerberg should resign and the Facebook board as well, and why?
I think we have to hold people accountable. I mean, every time something happens, there's an apology, there's some movement to change, and nothing happens, right? In March 2019, Facebook said it was banning white nationalism, and yet here we are. Here we are with this white supremacist taking over the Capitol building. Are we actually going to hold people accountable this time? My guess is no. I don't think that he will actually be asked to leave. I don't think there will be any even super hard conversations that he's going to have. And I hope that the Facebook board really thinks about like why this is. How do we allow the platform to be taken over and to be part of the, the weaponry in a white supremacist battle without any kind of guidelines, without any kind of control, without any kind of accountability. And that's the piece where tech isn't good at this. Tech isn't good at taking accountability. Tech isn't good at looking at its actions and seeing what they lead to. It's focused on, on engagement. It's focused on revenues. It's focused on stock price. Makes it really hard for things to change.
Now, you were the CEO of Reddit. Of course, we were just talking about Parler and Gab. There are other platforms out there. There are more niche platforms out there. What happens if the president is cut off from these mainstream platforms? What happens to the pro-Trump movement, the MAGA movement? Do they simply gain new momentum elsewhere, or are they slowed down?
They will be slowed down if they're not allowed to be on Twitter and Facebook. But I think the platforms will continue to be an on-ramp to these other, to these new platforms, and we'll see these new platforms grow. I think if Twitter and Facebook were really good about cutting them off, it would be different. It'd be harder to build more of an audience on these other platforms. But as of today, the content is flowing freely between the two platforms. Even if Trump gets cut off, the other folks who are supporting him, like his sons, his daughter, will continue to try to bring people to his content through Twitter and Facebook, through their own accounts.
So at this point, what do you think Twitter and Facebook should do? I mean, they've been tagging posts. They've been relying on this idea of newsworthiness to let posts that others might find offensive stand. I mean, do they need to fundamentally rethink the rules for politicians in particular?
Yeah, I think they have to go through a really, take a really hard look at what happened. How did we get here? How was, my platform, my product that I started as a way to connect people, as a way to promote free speech, actually used as a tool to take down a democracy for a day? Like, what happened there? Are these exceptions that I give to politicians and for newsworthiness actually having the impact that I want it to have, or is it actually exacerbating the problems that I'm trying to prevent? If you look, there's a lot of talk about Arab Spring and the role of Twitter in promoting democracy. This was the opposite. It's not working now, and this idea of free speech taken on by a private corporation where it doesn't really apply hasn't worked. The loudest voices are winning. Trump had one of the, if not the loudest voice, and he used it in a way that was incredibly harmful and incredibly toxic for years and years and years leading up to this point. Was that all worth it? Were those the right decisions? Should politicians be held to a higher standard because they have this public persona, because they have followers, because of their political office, and because people will follow them and people pay attention to them and they think that their behavior is something that should be emulated? So I think that they did it the wrong way. Instead of allowing for more rules, they gave fewer rules, and this is where we ended up.
All right. Project Include the CEO, Ellen Pao, former CEO of Reddit. Thanks so much, Ellen. Always appreciate your insights. Okay, coming up, Snowflake shares rallying the most in a month today despite a lockup expiring. We're going to talk to the CEO, Frank Slootman, about the company's goals and outlook ahead. This is Bloomberg. You are looking at a live shot of the White House press room. We are waiting for White House Press Secretary Kayleigh McEnany to take the podium. The White House has told us she'll be speaking momentarily, so we're going to stand by for that. While we wait, I want to tell you about some other big tech stories out today. Apple will take at least 5 years to launch an autonomous electric car because development work is still at an early stage. Some Apple engineers on the project believe the company could release a product in 5 to 7 years if Apple goes ahead with its plans. Bloomberg has learned that the car is nowhere near production, though they did warn that timelines could change. Bitcoin's wild price swings resumed after the world's largest cryptocurrency climbed above 40,000 for the first time. Strategists have cited demand from speculative retail traders following quant funds. The rich and even institutional investors are among the reasons for the surge. The total market value of cryptocurrencies climbed beyond $1 trillion for the first time on Thursday. And you can give another title to Elon Musk, the entrepreneur behind Tesla and SpaceX. He is now the richest person in the world, and I want to get to Kayleigh McEnany
on behalf of the entire White House. Let me be clear. The violence we saw yesterday at our nation's capital was appalling, reprehensible, and antithetical to the American way. We condemn it, the president and this administration, in the strongest possible terms. It is unacceptable, and those that broke the law should be prosecuted to the fullest extent of the law. I stood here at this podium the day after a historic church burned amid violent riots, and I said this: the First Amendment guarantees the right of the people to peaceably assemble. What we saw last night in Washington and across the country was not that, end quote. Make no mistake, what we saw yesterday afternoon in the halls of our Capitol likewise was not that. We grieve for the loss of life and those injured, and we hold them in our prayers and close to our hearts at this time. We thank our valiant law enforcement officers who are true American heroes. What we saw yesterday was a group of violent rioters undermining the legitimate First Amendment rights of the many thousands who came to peacefully have their voices heard in our nation's capital. Those who violently besieged our capital are the opposite of everything this administration stands for. The core value of our administration is the idea that all citizens have the right to live in safety, peace, and freedom. Those who are working in this building are working to ensure an orderly transition of power. Now it is time for America to unite, to come together, to reject the violence that we have seen. We are one American people under God. Thank you very much.
All right, White House Press Secretary Kayleigh McEnany there. Some brief remarks. She called the violence yesterday appalling and said that the president himself condemns it. She said that the folks who broke into the Capitol called them violent rioters who undermined the First Amendment, undermined the right to a peaceful protest. We're going to talk about that a little bit more later this hour, but one of the first statements that we are getting from the White House in a few hours, and we will be covering that more a bit later in the show. I do want to turn to Snowflake now. It was a record year for IPOs, and Snowflake's was one of the hottest. The data management company made headlines for soaring more than 100% on opening day and topped $110 billion in market value last month. Thursday, shares jumped 14% despite the expiration of a second lockup. Joining me now, CEO Frank Slootman. Frank, thank you so much for joining us. So obviously, a big part of the Snowflake story has been the share price given the run-up. And I'm curious, as shares continue to rise, what do you see as the total addressable market here in terms of more room to run?
Yeah, that's, Emily, that's actually a hard question to answer because it's incredibly fluid. It doesn't really do us any good to look at what the historical numbers have been, which is what analysts typically do. And the reason that it's so fluid and it's developing so quickly is because a platform like Snowflake is completely variable. There's no upper limit, to how much and how frequently and how fast people can run workloads. So we're often surprised, and you see that in our net revenue retention rates, how quickly our customers are growing in their consumption profile. So it's very hard to speculate for us on, geez, how big is this market will it really be? I mean, data is driving the digital revolution. Data operation is becoming the beating heart of the modern enterprise. Really hard to tell, where this all ends up when it's all said and done.
said, what are the adjacent markets that you see? Where are you looking or thinking about expanding?
Well, we're looking to expand in our core markets first and foremost. I mean, we're overcome by the scale and scope of our marketplace. It's not like we're looking for opportunity. Our opportunity is literally unfolding in front of us. I mean, our relationships with global system integrators are all indicating that our pipelines are developing very, very quickly. For one, because people are moving to the cloud. That's one of the long-term secular trends that we're fueled by as well. And then secondly, we're on the phone every single day with large enterprise, and they're like, how do we accelerate our data platforms? How do we actually have data science teams? How do we really drive signal? How do we use data to not just inform people, but to drive business processes? So there's a huge movement afoot to really harness and embrace the power that's presented here.
Now, Snowflake's debut soaring more than 100% on that first day really kicked off this debate about whether IPOs were being mispriced. I spoke to you on the day. You told me at the time you were thrilled. I wonder if, looking back, you've had some time to reflect if there's anything you would have done differently, or that you wish the bankers might have done differently.
Well, it's a lot of people on the financial side of the equation look at these things. They think of an IPO as a transaction. You offer a bunch of shares, and you're trying to extract the highest value of those shares. And it's not that simple for people who are sitting on my side of the table. And the reason is, it's not that different, by the way, when you're a startup company and you're trying to decide who your A series and B series investors are going to be, because these are the people you're going to be sitting around the table with for a long time. And you're looking for people that can build large positions. You're looking for people that want to sign up for 5 to 10 years. You're looking for people who will not chase momentum up or down, because you just simply have no life as a company when you have nothing but momentum players and fast money in your stock. So it's not just about the highest price, it's also about the quality of your institutional ownership.
So do you have any advice for some of the other IPOs, other company CEOs that are coming out of the gate? I mean, it wasn't just Snowflake. We saw it happen with Airbnb and DoorDash.
Well, here's another really important consideration, right? There is such a thing as a price demand curve. Well, what that means is some people are willing to pay way more than other people, but it doesn't mean that your entire offering can be sold at the price that the last 100 shares closed at, right? So it's always an illusion, like, oh, you left billions on the table. Well, that's, first of all, that's unknowable, right? And what you're really seeing is that somebody at the end of the trading day offered up a very high price for a very small number of shares. So don't let yourself go crazy over these things. You need to assemble a very strong institutional ownership, and you do the best price discovery you can on the number of shares that you're going to be selling and offering on that particular day.
Now, we do have the second lockup expiring today, which means company executives like yourself can sell. Can you share with us what your plans are if you plan to sell any shares?
No, executives cannot begin to sell until the March trading window opens or thereabouts. So we are still locked up. Our employees were partially unlocked for a small portion. Back in December, we had another lockup today, as you mentioned, but executives will not be permitted to start selling until the March window opens.
I do want to ask you about this SolarWinds hack, which is still unfolding and potentially rapidly expanding, and it's certainly kind of terrifying how a software company was basically weaponized. And I'm wondering what your thoughts are on that as a software company, what the implications are for, companies like yours that are selling to, hundreds of thousands of other companies out there.
We really need to invest, very, very aggressively in mastering your security model. The good news for company like ours and the scale that we operate in, we're getting penetration tested and audited and reviewed by so many large institutions around there. So in other words, there's an immense amount of scrutiny on the security perimeters that we have in our product, which is a good thing. Where you really run risk is, where enterprises do not have enough critical mass on their security resources to be able to adequately address that risk.
All right. Fascinating. Of course, we're going to continue to follow Frank Slootman, CEO and chair of Snowflake. Good to have you back on the show, Frank. All right, coming up, we'll have more of Bloomberg Technology after this quick break. This is Bloomberg. Welcome back to Bloomberg Technology. I'm Emily Chang in San Francisco. President-elect Biden is denouncing yesterday's attack on the U.S. Capitol. Speaking from Wilmington, Delaware, the president-elect said it was, quote, an assault literally on the citadel of liberty.
Don't dare call them protesters. They were a riotous mob, insurrectionists, domestic terrorists. It's that basic, it's that simple.
Biden also said President Trump's rhetoric paved the way for the violent breach and that President Trump himself is not above the law. He said, quote, we have a president who has made his contempt for the rule of law clear. Bloomberg Opinion's Tim O'Brien wrote about this very topic, saying, quote, Trump wants everything his heart desires. Tim with us now. So, Tim, we just heard briefly from White House Press Secretary Kayleigh McEnany. She was very quick. She called them rioters, not protesters, who were undermining others' right to peacefully protest. At this point, what is the point of a statement like that from the White House?
I think it's beside the point at this point, Emily, because this should have never taken place to begin with. Once it unspooled into what everyone worried it might unspool to, which was a seditious riot, the president and his White House should have immediately called for those folks to stand back and leave and exit. He never did that until later in the day. And now you've had this piecemeal response from people in his administration, either quitting or former people saying that they were completely disgusted by this, but they didn't quit earlier when they were part of the administration. And the problem with Kayleigh McEnany is that she's been on that podium flagrantly lying now for months and not actually having an honest dialogue with the American people. So I think it's, her coming in and condemning these folks is just beside the point at this. I think we're at a point now where I think we have to think as a country, what do we want to do institutionally to address these deep-seated problems that have been very apparent for years and really just burst into view in a new way yesterday, but aren't new at all.
So there's what do we do in the long term, but also what do we do about the next 2 weeks? You've got Pelosi and Schumer calling for the president to be ejected from office immediately. We just got this news. Bloomberg just broke the news about a list of planned pardons that he is planning to make on January 19th, his last day in office, including senior White House officials, family members, and possibly even himself. What is your reaction to that?
Well, once again, Donald Trump is attempting to stretch the boundaries of the Constitution in a way that degrades the presidency and empowers him and the people around him to exist above the rule of law. Again, that shouldn't surprise anyone. The issue of whether or not he would self-pardon has been in the air for quite some time. I think he's been lobbying his own advisors to find out whether or not he can get away with that. The interesting thing vis-a-vis his children is, as of yet, his children haven't been charged with any crimes. So what does he know that we don't know? And what is he worried about that we don't know yet that he's worried about? I think it's a really important moment. Mitch McConnell yesterday, prior to the certification vote, said he planned to vote to certify. He said he regarded it as the most important vote of his career. And he said the reason why, he said to his colleagues in the GOP, is we have to exist together and we have to exist in a world in which truth and fact matter, and then we have to have policies built around that. We will get past Donald Trump in the next 2 weeks. I think the issue is how does the country and institutions like the federal government, the media, the business community, and others move forward beyond his presidency and reconstruct the best things that have been lost over the last few years.
At this point, how likely is it, do you think, that he will actually be ejected from office or that the 25th Amendment will be invoked?
There's bipartisan talk of this. It's not just Democrats. And I think it's very unusual to have Republican members of Congress say they think it's time to get him out of there. I think they are not going to be able to impeach Donald Trump in the next 13 days. But they could begin an impeachment proceeding that, if he is then found guilty, would prevent him from running for another term. I think people are considering that. The virtues of a 25th Amendment action is that it gets him out of there quicker, but with fewer future consequences. But all of these should signify to people who are our listeners and people concerned about good government that people on both sides of the aisle don't believe that Donald Trump is fit to manage the country, and that there may be some danger even in the several days that are left for him to do some damage.
Now, in perhaps the most unprecedented development in the world of technology, you have Facebook banning Trump's account indefinitely, which was pretty surprising given all of the leeway that Facebook has given to him for the last 4 years. I'm curious what you make of this. He's actually, we believe, unsuspended on Twitter, just hasn't been tweeting since that 12-hour suspension that he was facing. But he, according to Twitter, deleted the offending tweets and could tweet at any time. But he is banned on Facebook at least for the next 2 weeks. What do you make of that?
Well, it's a bit of a role reversal, right? Because I think prior to this, Twitter had been more aggressive towards the president's Twitter feed than Facebook had been toward the president's feed on Facebook. And I don't know what there still is probably a great story to be written about what caused this turnaround at Facebook. I think beyond each of those companies, the larger issue this raises is how do social media platforms also exist going forward? Because, as you know, they would prefer to be regulated as technology platforms and not as publishers or media enterprises for a variety of reasons. And among those, they don't want to be liable for damaging information they might publish, and they also don't want to be subjected to the kind of criticism I think that they have over during the Trump years about the abuse of the platforms. And I think both Twitter and Facebook and their attorneys and federal regulators are going to have to really wrestle this issue to the ground, because social media platforms now are operating in many of the same ways as media companies do, and they have the same kind of important social role, but they're not regulated the same way.
What is your sense of what happens after he leaves office? Maybe he will have access to these mainstream platforms himself, maybe not, but certainly his supporters will. What happens to the pro-Trump movement? What happens to the Republican Party? And does President Trump, Donald Trump himself, remain a leader in some form, or does the hierarchy reorganize?
Well, I think the hierarchy reorganizes. I don't think he will remain a leader. I think he could quite possibly remain a kingmaker. He certainly has a lot of traction in the far right wing of the Republican Party, and he is a proven fundraiser and a caustic and magnetic media presence. And I think he's certainly going to try to start or buy a media company and use that as a platform of his own, I think, for both political, business, and personal reasons. I'm not sure that will be successful over time. He's not someone who's ever demonstrated the kind of patience or strategic vision to actually manage an enterprise to fruition. But they'll make an effort at that, and I think that'll be an interesting first take on what he does. I don't think he'll be in Washington. I think he'll be in Florida, and I think he will try to be a kingmaker from down in Florida. And I don't think Mitch McConnell is going to have much patience with it. And I think it's very hard to actually have a real effect on the game in Washington if you're trying to do it from a golf course in Florida. So that may have a very short shelf life. But you will see his rallies continue, and you'll see his fundraising continue, and he will be able to throw his weight behind candidates that he likes.
All right. Tim O'Brien, always appreciate and love hearing your predictions of what's to come. Tim O'Brien of Bloomberg Opinion, thanks so much. Coming up, the online personal finance company SoFi planning for takeovers and to go public via SPAC. We're going to speak with CEO Anthony Noto about the company's plans coming up. This is Bloomberg. finance, the online personal finance company is planning for takeovers after agreeing to go public. This would be in a merger with a blank check company that values the upstart at around $8.7 billion. The company CEO told Bloomberg earlier, we want to invest heavily in acquisitions and new growth vehicles. Joining me now, the CEO himself, Anthony Noto, and Bloomberg Sonali Basak, who covers Wall Street for us. Anthony, thank you so much for joining us. So why did you decide to go public via SPAC? And with Chamath Palihapitiya's vehicle in particular, a certainly controversial figure in Silicon Valley.
Sure. Well, we were in the process of doing a private financing round, which we ended up closing with T. Rowe Price on December 30th. And as we were meeting with investors, some of them thought that we should consider going public at that point in time, either via a regular IPO or a SPAC. The reason why a SPAC makes a lot of sense for SoFi is a couple of factors. First, we can sit down with investors over a longer period of time and educate them before we become a public company. So we spent the last 2 weeks educating investors in order to raise the pipe, and we'll spend the next 30 to 45 days educating a broader group of institutional buy-side investors on the SoFi story. We have a very big vision, and we're investing meaningfully in capturing that opportunity to try to be a winner take most. And it's important investors understand the magnitude of the investments we've made, the benefits, and what will happen over the next 10 years. The second reason why it's beneficial for us is deal certainty. We're a consumer finance brand, and a regular way IPO doesn't have the same level of deal certainty as a PIPE and a SPAC. We closed a significant amount of incremental capital in the SPAC process, $1.2 billion of additional PIPE proceeds on top of the $370 million. So that PIPE is closed and will fund when we actually do the de-SPACing process. So much more deal certainty than a regular IPO. And then last, we're able to give forecasts over just not the near term, but the next couple of years. And given the fact that we have 3 different businesses, we have a lending business, we have a technology platform, and then financial services products, they're all at different growth rates and different levels of profitability. So being able to take investors through that level of detail is also conducive to ensuring the value of the company is best reflected in the price that's being paid. So those are the 3 critical reasons.
Anthony, on one hand, you're a technology company. On the other hand, you're a finance company. And finance does not tend to get the valuations that a technology company does. So now that you're going to be entering public markets, how do you expect investors will value you?
Yeah, I mean, having been a sell-side research analyst and then a banker covering the internet space broadly defined, I have found that the valuations of companies is highly correlated with a return measurement. In some cases, it's return on invested capital, and others it's return on equity. And companies that can drive outsized returns get higher multiples. And I think we will show over time that we're on a path to an outsized multiple because our cost base is lower than traditional finance companies. And because our entire service is being delivered through a technology platform, it drives a higher level of return than a traditional financial services company. And I think we still have to prove this to investors. I think we'll show over time that we can have outsized returns because we are leveraging technology as the main distribution vehicle for our product to consumers. We're one of the only places that I know of that has a complete comprehensive set of products across borrow, save, spend, invest, and protect on a mobile platform. And as the awareness of that grows and our scale grows, we'll have outsized returns.
So, when you look at your presentations on the deal today, it's clear that your ambitions are very big. You want to be an industry leader, similar to how Amazon is in its own industry or Spotify is. Who are you going after?
Yeah, we're going after above average household income, about $100,000 total household. So that could be 2 people contributing to that with very strong credit. That's our core target. We are expanding beyond that as we launch products that are more mainstream like SoFi Money and SoFi Invest. But our core target remains a higher earner with very strong credit that we call high earners not well served. The financial services world has really left this group of people behind as big banks and financial institutions have optimized what businesses they're in based on return on equity goals as opposed to what members really need. And our value proposition is quite simple. We want to be there for every one of the major financial decisions someone makes in their lives, because if we're not and they make a mistake on how they decide to fund their college education, or they overpay for a home, or they don't invest in their 20s, it'll be really hard for them to catch up. we need to be there for every one of those decisions in order to help them get their money right. We can't just do borrowing and we can't just do investing. And so our goal is to have a comprehensive one-stop shop. So we're there for all the major decisions you'll make in your financial life and all the day-to-day decisions as well. And that's a very ambitious strategy. And I do agree with you. It's very similar to the broad-based approach that Amazon took. And we similarly are doing it on one technology platform. And we also have an enterprise offering as we expose that technology platform to other companies in the sector.
Now, Anthony, SoFi obviously has a very unique outlook into the health of American consumers, and we see the economy and business undergoing so many major transitions at the same time that vaccines are rolling out slowly, stimulus rolling out slowly, but still millions of people have lost their jobs. Work is shifting, remote work, we're going to be doing more of it. What is your outlook on the health of American consumers for 2021?
Yeah, there's a lot of uncertainty out there. I mean, the global pandemic has had a devastating effect on many people. For the first time in their lives, their financial success or financial income has gone to zero at no fault of their own. Given the fact that we have such a diverse portfolio of products now in lending, we have home loans, unsecured personal loans. We also have in-school college loans. And then we have student loan refinancing. And then we have a technology platform through Galileo that's a very large business. And we are also in credit card, a brokerage product called SoFi Invest, and then SoFi Money. That diversification of products has actually served the community of individuals very well because people are stuck at home having to do their financials at home. And you can do all of that on your phone with SoFi. And so while there have been soft spots within the market overall, in the third quarter, we had record revenue and very strong profitability because of the accelerating need of people to have to do all of these financial activities at their house, given the risks of COVID-19 outside of their homes. From an economic standpoint, the government has done a very good job with stimulus. Obviously, the program that's coming out now is coming just in time, and I think it will be very positive for the economy if there's additional stimulus packages throughout the next quarter. But that has helped shore up a lot of the balance sheets of individuals.
All right, Anthony Noto, CEO of SoFi. Good to have you back on the show, along with Bloomberg's Wall Street reporter Sonali Basak there. Okay, still ahead, delisting and banning companies. U.S. China relations heating up just days before a big transition in the administration. We're going to talk to an expert on the world's two largest economies next. This is Bloomberg. The New York Stock Exchange is proceeding with a plan to delist three major Chinese telecom firms. Its second about-face this week after U.S. Treasury Secretary Steven Mnuchin disagreed with his decision to give the companies a reprieve. This as President Trump signed an order banning U.S. transactions with 8 Chinese apps, including Ant Group's Alipay and Tencent's digital wallets, riling up Beijing just days before he's slated to leave office. For more now, we are joined by Bill Reinsch, Senior Advisor at the Center for Strategic and International Studies. Bill, thank you so much for joining us. So is this going to happen, given that Trump is leaving office in 2 weeks?
Well, the question on the Chinese apps is will it get blessed by the courts? It's an executive order, so it can happen. Biden can overturn it. Commerce has got 45 days to implement it, so it will be up to Biden. I don't think this is one of the things he's going to do on the first day. He's got a long list of things to do on the first day, and this is not at the top. So it'll be out there for a while, and I don't think that it will necessarily go away. It's more likely that the courts will block it, just like they blocked the similar orders on TikTok and WeChat.
So then what course do you expect the Biden administration to take on U.S.-China relations? Do you believe that they will take a similarly aggressive approach, given the level of tension between these two countries right now?
I think the policy will be the same. The tactics will be different. He's under a lot of pressure from Congress in both parties, his own and Republicans, to take a very tough line. He took a tough line in the election. Trump accused him of being soft, and his reaction was to be tough. And I don't think there's a big difference in the parties on the way they look at China. I think he'll be more inclined to use diplomacy and to develop coalition, try to get other countries, particularly Europe, EU countries, to approach the Chinese collectively. So I don't think tariffs will be his weapon of first choice, but it'll still be in his toolbox.
And, given, Bill, that you are focused on international relations, I'm curious what you think other countries, how they're looking at the events of the last 24 hours here in the United States that is supposed to be a beacon of democracy.
Yeah, it's depressing on so many levels. Having been down here and watching it, I can tell you, and having worked up there in that building for a long time, it's been depressing. This is going to hurt our prestige enormously with other countries. It's very hard to talk about democracy and freedom to other countries when you go through an episode like this. It plays directly into China's hands. China is busy selling its authoritarian model of governance to other countries, and their argument is things work better. And when we have an episode like this, it helps make the Chinese case. It's going to take us a long time to live this down. It'll never be forgotten in this country. I hope it could be forgotten in other countries.
So, what is your outlook for when Biden takes over? What changes?
Well, I think the main thing to keep in mind is no sudden moves, particularly on trade. He's been very clear about that. His top priorities are restarting the economy and dealing with the COVID pandemic. He would like to put trade issues off for later. He can't put them all off. In fact, you've talked about one of them. This executive order is going to be, it's going to be sitting there. They have to do something with it in the first 45 days from today, in the first couple of weeks. And he's got other issues like what to do with the WTO Director General. But I don't think there's going to be sudden moves. It's going to take him a while to decide how to approach China. It's going to take him a while to rebuild the relationship with the Europeans, which he really wants to do. That's near the top of his list. But those things take time. It takes personal contact, and it takes a good bit of finesse and planning.
We'll have to leave it there. Bill Reinsch of the Center for Strategic and International Studies. Lots of questions on what's to come. That does it for this edition of Bloomberg Technology. I'm Emily Chang in San Francisco. This is Bloomberg.